Bransfield.
The beautiful game. Soccer net kick. Run, run, shout, pop a calf muscle. Football has a lot of names, and over the years football has had a lot of interactive screen-based representations of the sport. I'm going to some lengths here to not say game again, as I just said it a sentence ago. I think I got away with that. It wouldn't be hugely surprising, though, if you weren't really aware of a time before there just being FIFA and PES, neither of which, strictly speaking, exist anymore. EAFC and eFootball, names I will never call them. But the two big dogs, functionally, not literally speaking, the only two football games around. Not heard of Chris Kamara's Street Soccer? What a sad life. But the point of this video, there were loads of football games in the arcade, so I wanted to look at them. Some of them, not all of them. Get an idea of what happened, what went right, what went wrong, and really, I just wanted a justification to play some games I used to play loads in the arcade, right? That's the main justification. Go! It wasn't the very beginning, but 1983 saw Exciting Soccer by Alpha Denshi release in arcades. It also saw the birth of Bransfield, but that's too exciting for this video. Exciting Soccer was basic, sure, but it helped set us down the path of arcade soccer ball for years to come. It was fine. It wasn't the first. Others arrived before, others the same year, more would follow, but it was a start point, and it pretty directly led to Tekken World Cup in 1985, released by Tecmo, then known as, well, Tekken. This virtual kickabout started to drag the arcade experience into the modern era, offering a top-down view on a fast-paced game of pass and movery that, dare I say it, still manages to have some appeal. Some, I say, not a lot. But the shift to a fuller representation of football was on clear display with Tekken's Tekken World Cup, and, dare I also say this, the ball was rolling for things to get better. So it was that some 4 years later in 1989, Tekken, now called Tecmo, released the bar-raising Tecmo World Cup 90 into coin-up dens, pubs and leisure centre cafes the world over. World Cup 90, I don't think it's outlandish to claim, broke out into a sprint from the baby steps the company's previous World Cup up had taken, setting the standard for arcade football games in the years that followed. World Cup 90 wasn't the first to adopt a side-on view, it wasn't the first to recreate as much of the real game as it did, it wasn't the first to do pretty much anything. But it was the first to do all of those things well and simultaneously garner a lot of popularity with players. It broke through. The cabinet was everywhere. I can think of 4 or 5 places off the top of my head I played World Cup 90 or its bootleg version with European club teams in it back in the front end of the 1990s. If you were coming to World Cup 90 with fresh eyes, I couldn't tell you it's a banger. I know what it's like to be told something like, fittingly, Tecmo Bowl on NES is a legendary classic of the sports genre, when all I really see is an old crap farty turd of a game. I don't have the personal attachment to the American football game. You might not have the personal attachment to the association football game, so I do understand. Anyway, World Cup 90 is a banger. It's a simple case of a couple of minutes in which you need to belt the ball into the onion bag more times than your opponent, or it's game over. You're able to mix up your tactics, dribble to victory, pass to victory, long ball to victory, escape to victory, and face an ever-increasing challenge from the computer, going from piss easy to, oh yeah, it's an arcade game, it wants all my money, in very little time at all. Or play it against a friend, or your brother who will beat you relentlessly, it's all part of growing up, I guess. World Cup 90 did set the bar. Simplistic even by the following year's standards, it nevertheless managed to show just how exciting and true to the sport a game of arcade football could be. And I am not joking or exaggerating at all when I say this, while playing the game to capture this footage, I was genuinely punching the air and shouting triumphantly when scoring against more difficult opponents. That's the sign of a good football game, whether my judgment is clouded by nostalgia or not. Sadly, I did decide to make this video about more than just Tecmo World Cup 90, so I can't just keep on blathering about it forever. Ah well, the beautiful game carries on. Plenty of other football games followed, and plenty I played for this video, but ultimately I decided to just mention that and move on to the next big step in the evolution of the pay-per-play kickabout genre, and another one of my personal favourites, 1992's Super Sidekicks. The Neo Geo release was something I would hammer the game select button to get straight to on the MVS cabinets that were scattered about arcades and airports and holiday camps games rooms of my youth, because SNK created something wonderful, by 1992 standards, with this one. Super Sidekicks was pure arcade, and it was pure SNK. That Neo Geo-ness oozed from its pixely pores. The first game was nowhere near the best of the series, sure, but hindsight didn't apply in '92 because time following a linear path or something. But compared to its contemporaries, SNK's dash and shoot 'em up really lifted the experience. It was a more technical game than most others, in the coin-up sense at least, and so rewarded returning players with deeper tactics and techniques to learn. But it was also big and beautiful, loud and brash, with stunning presentation, all the celebrations, and a fast pace that kept it consistently exciting. I said the same with Tecmo World Cup 90, but Super Sidekicks didn't really innovate anything particularly. It just brought all the best elements the arcade football genre had seen so far together, wrapped them up with the ever-reliable Neo Geo bow, and let you have at it in one of the best of the earlier cabinet-based virtual kickabouts. With a firmly established formula, the arcade football genre then had to prove to the world it was more than just a flash in the pan. It had to show there were legs to the format, that there was true deep-lying appeal beneath the coiffed looks, flashy tricks, and oh-so-loud shouts of GOAL! Yes, the scene was set for what the games industry still to this day does best. Exploit it, flood the market, saturate the crap out of things, and rinse players for every penny they had in their pockets. Oh, and to experiment with the form and function a bit too, of course. The less cynical side of that particular coin. There were a lot of arcade football games. A lot. Naturally, many titles birthed in the years prior made their return. For example, Super Sidekicks went through multiple iterations. Super Sidekicks 2, the World Championship in 1994, Super Sidekicks 3, The Next Glory in 1995, which saw a World Cup-themed do-over in 1998, and the Ultimate 11 SNK Football Championship in 1996. I don't think it's unfair to focus on Super Sidekicks 2 for the sake of brevity, mind. The games that followed only really introduced the odd tweak or graphical flourish that didn't change the core experience much at all. Whereas SS2, shouldn't call it that, was the game to bring the original Super Sidekicks up a fair few notches into the realms of genuinely really enjoyable even today in 2025 when I am making this video. Sure, it wasn't Golden Age PES level of depth, quality and tactical nous, and sure, Super Sidekicks 3 was the better game, but Super Sidekicks 2 smoothed the first in the series' rough edges and refined the formula into what would be used for all the subsequent entries. It was pretty great, it's still pretty great, but the fact is SNK cooled on the Sidekicks franchise by the tail end of the 90s, seeing that arcade-facing folks were clearly more into fighting games and Metal Slug than the virtual kickabouts it was producing. But that's jumping ahead in the timeline. Like I said, there were a lot of football games littering arcades in the 1990s. I played a lot of them, both back then and while researching this vid. Taito had started up the Hat Trick Hero, or however you knew it locally, series a few years prior and carried it on with Hat Trick Hero 95 in 1994. It's one I will mention here because it was fabulous fun and really serves to highlight in this retrospective view just what it was the arcade footy games were going for at that point. Big, brash, sometimes silly representations of the sport with an emphasis on super skilled players, even sometimes super moves, and seemingly ubiquitously a specific button to carry out violent challenges against opposition players. I guess it was the era of Duncan Ferguson, so makes sense. Sega dipped in a toe with Super Visual Football Sega Cup in 1994, which, well, had that name for a start, but it served as an example of a studio trying to mix things up a bit. It didn't come across as a Me Too copy-paste of all the other games out there vying for your attention, with different presentation, a different focus, and a more serious face on the whole thing. It didn't work, and nobody cared really, sure, but it was an attempt. And other attempts came in to do something different. SNK had actually tried first with Soccer Brawl before it launched Super Sidekicks in 1992, with the Speedballer-like game, to me, deserving more of a run than it got. Bring it back, guys! Yeah. Some studios thought they could mix it up with five-a-side, such as with Kick Goal in 1995, but TCH's game missed the memo on making things actually fun in any way at all, so that failed and should remain forgotten. I apologise if anyone was reminded of its existence here. But the mid to late 90s also saw some experiments with the whole 3D graphics thing that had taken the world by polygonal storm. Sega didn't just stick to the Visual Cup attempt in 1994, actually releasing the first of the Virtua Striker series the same year. Now, I will say I can only get enjoyment from this one these days through sheer force of nostalgia alone, because the actual play of the thing is clunky, slow to respond, and thoroughly frustrating. But it was a huge step for arcade kickabouts, bringing the visuals into a whole new era of wonderfulity, it is a word, and opening our eyes to what we could expect to see for the future of the genre. Immediately, the 2D pixel presentation would no longer do. Small players? Psh, boring. We now wanted it big. We wanted it in our face, we wanted it motion captured, and we wanted it now. Unfortunately for Sega and the rest of the arcade manufacturers, that future Virtua Striker had shown us wasn't one we would see much of in the arcades. Sure, in 1994, football games in the home weren't anywhere near the level of graphical quality we saw in the arcades, whether 3D or 2D. But the home had already started to prove fertile ground for what it was players actually wanted from their soccer ball titles. More tactical, more in-depth, and, what I think was most key, more focused on long-term play. Rather than a tournament of 3 or 4 matches, players wanted to set up proper leagues and play the full 38 or 46 games. Yes, I'm going by the English league structure there. They wanted to build their squad to customize things, to have long-running rivalries with friends and enemies alike. And the arcade, though there were later moves to fill this gap, just wasn't able to provide. FIFA began in 1993, and by 1996's FIFA 97 was fully 3D. Konami had already launched its first fully 3D home football title, Goalstorm, in 1995. Sure, they both paled next to arcade hardware, but it was a huge step, and each game worked well enough to show there was potential in the home that outstripped the coin-up dens of the world. Visually, they still needed to catch up, but the fundamentals were strong. In the arcade? Other way around, bro. It wasn't long until FIFA shook out the clunk and became a snappy, but still pretty garbage, come on, let's be honest, 3D football game. While Goalstorm quickly morphed into International Superstar Soccer Pro, and from there turned into Pro Evolution Soccer. On the back foot against FIFA from a presentation perspective, but always the better game of football. At least until around 2009 or so, but that's a whole other topic for a whole other 200-hour-long video. Point being, home football games didn't look as flashy as their arcade counterparts, but by the mid to late 90s, it was clear they were going to be where the genre defaulted to for the foreseeable. It just made more sense with what it was players were after. Leagues and tournaments needing hours invested into them, customizability, the chance to play regularly and easily against and with friends. So the graphics weren't as snazzy, didn't matter. The foundations were stronger, and the looks could always catch up as technology evolved. The coin-up cabinets had their sheen and sheer brashness, but by the late 90s it was already clear this was an arcade genre on the outs. Something needed to be done to keep people playing, and so the efforts began to make something stand out. The efforts failed, just to be clear, as a wee bit of a spoiler, but they were made. Namco, for example, tried something nifty in 1997 with Libero Grande, a 3D football game where you controlled just one player on the team instead of the traditional whole team thing. It was a cool idea and something that's been riffed on and ripped off by FIFA and PES in the years that followed, but probably the main point against Libero Grande was that, well, it was more suited to the home. As proven by the positive reception of the PlayStation port and the subsequent PlayStation-only and not in the arcade sequel, because following the career path of a solo player was something needing a bigger time investment than you could offer players in the arcade. So, Sega made the effort, trying to carry things on with Virtua Striker. The second entry to the series hit in 1997, the third in 2001, and the final fourth in 2004, also updated in 2006. But the shiny new newness of each sequel and update just didn't have the impact anymore. And this was a series that proved out the whole looks versus actual game theory I was speaking on previously. Both Virtua Striker 2 and Virtua Striker 3 released on home formats, the Dreamcast and GameCube respectively, and didn't do much, to be honest. VS2 DC saw a middling reception, criticising its lack of depth and unlack of clunkiness in the most part. VS3 GC saw a middling reception. Yep, this time with fewer barbs aimed at a lack of depth, but just as much criticism as before pointed toward the game itself. The bombast alone wasn't enough to carry things on GameCube, as Virtua Striker 3 continued to display a clunkiness you just didn't see with contemporaries like ESPN MLS Extra Time and Winning 11-6 Final Evolution. Even FIFA 2002, though that was a gimmick-laden turd of a game, and no, I promised I wouldn't veer off into that topic. Point being, why would you play home ports of arcade football games that weren't as good as the Master League touting titles you could pick up instead? The whole better graphics in the arcade thing didn't even stand up anymore, with both the Dreamcast and GameCube ports being pretty much arcade perfect in the looks department. It was a seemingly pointless endeavour, and the writing felt very much on the wall for arcade foot-em-ups. The need to make something that resonated with arcade audiences, especially in Japan, where coin-up dens would continue to be popular for a significant amount of time beyond what we managed here in not Japan, did live on in the likes of Konami, which in 2001 put out Evolution Soccer, a spin-off of the Pro Evolution Soccer games from the home hang on a second, Brezasoft. Who in the name of Batigol is Brezasoft? Ah, right, here we go. In 2002, Konami put out World Soccer Winning 11 arcade style. PES, but in the arcade, and without the ability to pay for it once and then play it non-stop for days and weeks on end because the early noughties Winning 11 and Pro Evo games were absolutely incredible. As I mentioned mere seconds ago, you already had Master League in the home, so why would you bother with this? Well, for one thing, it was Japan, where, like I said, arcades maintained a level of popularity for a considerable amount of time compared to the quick smart death and rebirth as proto-gambling dens we see them as today in the West. Winning 11 Arcade wasn't a failure. There were updates and upgrades released for years through to 2014, but there's also a reason few people remember, know, or care about this spin-off Konami dabbled in for a while. Sega, meanwhile, wasn't letting Virtua Striker's Freddy Adu-like next big thing but ultimately pretty mediocre and forgotten performance put it off trying to maintain some presence in the arcade footy world. In 2002, it put out World Club Champion Football, the first arcade game to use a soon-to-be mega-popular collectible card system, and the first in a series of arcade games that ran for nearly 20 years. It wasn't really a game of directly controlling the players, as had been the case for almost all previous coin-up Socceroos, but it wasn't quite hateful bollocks either, so small mercies? Something like that. You were the manager, you built your team and saw a much lengthier experience than in traditional arcade games thanks to the card system. You controlled the team indirectly by issuing instructions via button presses. It was a big gimmick, essentially, but it was a gimmick that worked well in its native Japan, and one that didn't translate well to the rest of the world. Have I mentioned the death of arcades in the West enough yet? What else? Well, the physical kickball games, things like Kick It or Crazy Kick or, I don't know, Kick Bastard. Made that one up, but it may as well be real. The games where you physically kicked a ball at a thing, a screen, a target, whatever. While already a thing for some time, they started to pop up more through the late 90s into the early 2000s. They were fine. I played a few, always fancied myself decent at a set piece, so fun to kick some ball there. And machines of that ilk are still going strong to this day, though, as with all arcade games in these parts and these days, they're tied completely to the ticket dispensing mechanic of soft gambling that's being used to get kids addicted to that whole shebang from a super young age. I digress. Actual football games, where you played, where you controlled a team or a player and passed and shot and tackled, they were thinner and thinner in number with each passing year. Some tried to innovate by doing things like using the physical kickball gimmick, like World Kicks and Football Power both did in 1999. Fun for a couple of matches, but entirely forgettable beyond that. Probably the best example of arcade footy titles in this period, as it applies to the point I'm making here, was the standard, non-gimmicky Premier 11 being made around 2003 by Sammy before the Sega merger. It fell off the face of the earth. There's a whole sub-story about the hunt for working versions of Premier 11 you can look into, but for the sake of me, this video, and my sanity, I won't go into it. The game essentially doesn't exist in any public form. It was made, it was tested publicly, and it was dropped likely without much of a second thought. That, I think, ultimately sums up what happened to coin-up soccer. Manufacturers followed the audience, and the audience was looking elsewhere for its toe pokes and through balls. Was there anything else? Maybe. The World Club Champion Series trundled along in the background, the Winning 11s, as I mentioned. Perhaps there were some other arcade football games doing the rounds through the mid to late aughts, but it didn't matter. The genre had taken too many lumps over the years, and the injuries had piled up to the point that despite the odd moment of inspiration, despite sometimes displaying the old vibrancy and joy we knew it for in years past, the arcade football genre had to hang up its boots. The younger generation was firmly established and playing a much slicker, more rounded and enjoyable game of Virtual Soccer Net Kick in the home. While the old arcade dog retired, broken and into obscurity, the crowd barely noticed. Rabid chants for licensed clubs and players were drowning out any semblance of sadness at an era ending. The Terrace's eyes focusing solely and firmly on the Master Leagues and extended multiplayer sessions lasting more than just a few minutes before you had to put more money into the machine. Soccer's coin-up playstyle was outdated and old-fashioned, and it had to die out. But I see you, arcade football games. I celebrate you. Because while your career was cut short and your flame hadn't been burning anywhere near as bright for years before it all came to an end, I remember what you meant to me, to my brother, to millions of players around the world. You gave us joy and excitement and delight. You showed us a new and flashy style. You let us dream of the potential of what could become of a genre that wasn't quite as bombastic in the home. You pushed boundaries at times, you introduced ideas and set standards at others. Your knees gave up on you too soon, sure, but you had an undeniable influence. When the final whistle did blow on your career, it was clear that you always gave us a full time. That's either an amazing or an appalling pun, but I am leaving it in there. Thanks for watching, and thanks as always to my patrons on Patreon for their ever-passionate support, cheering me on from the stands as they do, even when I pick up my 4th red card of the season for Descent. True story, only player in the history of the 6-a-side league I used to play in to be sent up for Descent? Me! Anyway, you can join them at the link below or at the end of the video. I'm off to petition Arcade Archives to bring Tecmo World Cup 90 to modern consoles. Bye!